Welcome to Virtual Regeneron ISEF. I'm Mary Sue Coleman, President of the Association of American Universities and a trustee for the Society for Science and the Public. I'm also an ISEF and STS alumna and a biochemist. ISEF is very meaningful to me since it was a central part of my life as a high school student many years ago, and I know it's very important to the young people we're going to be talking with today. In this panel, Women in STEM, we will focus on several prominent scientists and hear their stories leading to great success. We're joined by Dr. Frances Arnold, Linus Pauling Professor at Caltech, who was awarded a Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2018, Dr. Diane Newman, the Binder Amgen Professor at Caltech and MacArthur Fellow in 2016, ISEF 87 and 88, and Dr. Monica Schleyer-Smith, Associate Professor at Stanford and Hellman Fellow 2015, and STS in 2001. Let me start by asking you, Dr. Schleyer-Smith, to tell us just a bit about your research in quantum physics and why it excites you.
Sure. So I am an experimental physicist, and it really is the topic of quantum mechanics that somehow drew me into the field of physics. It's something I first saw a glimpse of, I would say, in actually high school chemistry classes, where I learned about electrons and atoms or molecules and learned that I shouldn't think of an electron as just being at a point, but as something that is somehow delocalized in an orbital that describes the quantum uncertainty and where it is. And that idea seemed fascinating, but I had this sense that to sort of go beyond hand-waving pictures and really understand what this meant, I needed to take physics and understand also the mathematical foundations of this. And so that led me to study chemistry and physics and math throughout college, and made me realize that actually I would love to go into a field where I actually get to deal day to day with quantum mechanics in the lab. And I get to do that as somebody who works with laser cooled atoms. So in my lab, we use lasers to cool atoms very close to absolute zero temperature. And we have such a high degree of control over these atoms that they serve really as model systems for studying quantum mechanics and also trying to understand how we can harness the sort of surprising and counterintuitive aspects of quantum mechanics, perhaps ultimately also for some technological benefit.
Dr. Arnold, your work on evolutionary protein design methods give you insights about useful enzymes. Did you know that evolution was going to be so interesting in your research?
I certainly didn't know it before I rediscovered what nature discovered billions of years ago, that there's this incredible design process that's given rise to all life that we know and all the chemistry of life. And it's a simple design algorithm that works at all scales from molecules to ecosystems. When I discovered that it could help me design new proteins, new enzymes, doing all this new chemistry, I was absolutely flabbergasted and thrilled to be able to use it. So now I breed molecules like you breed cats and dogs, and it works.
Dr. Newman, evolution has also been critical in your work, but you study the coevolution of bacteria and their environments from ancient Earth to the human body. Where did that idea come from?
It came from discovering just how much more capable and interesting bacteria are when it comes to what they can eat and breathe than us humans. So unlike us, they can respire all sorts of things, not just oxygen. And the more I dug into that, the more I became aware that their remarkable metabolic versatility helps explain what the Earth looks like today and how it came to be that way. And you can just look at our atmosphere. The oxygen there is thanks to a microbial invention over 2.5 billion years ago. And so as I got into this topic and I began to appreciate just the elegance and modularity of microbial metabolism, I also got excited because it's programmable. Once you understand the rules, you can engineer life to do all sorts of useful things, be it generating energy in novel ways, conserving energy for applications, or even new approaches to treating chronic infections.
Our students have sent in a number of questions, so I want to turn to those questions now. Is it okay for me to use your given names?
Sure.
Francis, when did you first become involved in science, and did a teacher or a parent help? And this is from Brianna Brownson at Port Chester, New York in the US.
I think I was born into a family of would-be scientists. My father was a nuclear physicist, so that might have had some influence. And I was always surrounded by brothers. I have 4 brothers. We were very competitive in school and everywhere else. So I tried hard to be good at math and things that maybe the girls didn't do quite as often. But then I found out I actually had a real talent for it, and that became my life work.
Diane and Monica, like me, you both competed in ISEF and STS in high school. And so I want to ask you, I'm going to start with you, Diane, but what impact did those experiences have on you?
Oh, it was completely transformative. I really credit my decision ultimately to pursue a career in science to the joy that I had going in 1987 to Puerto Rico for the International Science and Engineering Fair. I was a kid from a family, neither of whose parents were scientists. And so for me, getting into science was strictly thanks to my public school that mandated every year us doing science projects. And because I was a nerd and really enjoyed doing those projects, wound up being a lot of fun. And when I kind of shockingly wound up winning the Virginia State Science Fair when I was in the 10th grade, no one saw that coming. My parents and I were all completely shocked. But this led to my going to Puerto Rico with the women who ran the Virginia State Science Fair, Nancy Aiello and Sally Wren. And I have stayed friends with them my entire life, and I'm incredibly grateful to them and to all the teachers who give their time to encourage kids like me to take, the initiative to explore your creativity and reward you for it. It was just an amazing experience, and I'm incredibly grateful to them. And I feel we all should be. These people really change your life.
So I just want to ask you a little bit of a follow-up question. Did you have the idea for the first project that you wanted to do, or did a teacher sort of sit down with you and say, well, what about this or what about that?
Yeah, I had the idea, but it certainly was impacted by my older brother. So what I didn't say earlier is that while neither of my parents were scientists, I have a half brother who's a physicist. He's the only other scientist in my family. And when I was in high school, I really loved physics. In fact, I wanted to be a structural engineer and design bridges. At the time, I wasn't into biology, which is kind of ironic, but I loved physics. And my brother, knowing this, he encouraged me, and he told me about this phenomenon called resonance, where you blast sound waves at something and plates can go into a resonant frequency, and if you put dust on the top it makes a cool pattern. So I got inspired by that, and I designed my science fair projects around that.
Oh, that's great. Well, Monica, you were an STSer, so what was that? How did that change your life?
Yeah, so I participated in science fairs and in STS, and to me, these were really an opportunity to pursue kind of my own creative ideas in a way that you often don't get to do just in a science classroom or a science lab. So for me, that really was, I think, the first chance to get a taste of what science is really like. So I have to say now, one of the things I love about my career is that nobody tells me what to do. I get to decide which problems to pursue. And I would say both the science fairs and STS were sort of a microcosm of that. For example, in high school, I was playing music and I was fascinated by music. And at the same time, I loved math. And I did this project where I started doing some really mathematical analysis of fractal structures in music. And this was something that somewhere I just read something about this and started programming and trying to understand it. And it wasn't something where a teacher told me this is a project you should do. It was something that I was just totally curious about and got to follow my own curiosity. And that was something that I realized I wanted to keep doing in life, and I've been able to keep doing as a scientist.
Oh, that's terrific.
Hi, I'm KU1 from China. My question for the panel is, what are the advantages for women in STEM?
That's a great question. So I have to say that on a day-to-day basis, I'm not usually sort of thinking specifically about myself as a woman. Like I think of myself foremost as a physicist. So it's not something I'm constantly consciously thinking about. But I do think there are advantages certainly to having diverse perspectives and just different ways of thinking about problems. And I think there probably are ways in which, as a woman, I might have a different perspective than a man looking at the same problem. But some of that is also, of course, down to the individual level and not so much about being a woman versus being a man. I think that there are certainly also many facets to being a scientist that involve both the analytical mindset and in some cases the ability to manage a group of people at my stage in my career where I have different students working with me who are really responsible for making the research happen. So I certainly feel that one thing I'm quite proud of is having been able to sort of create a research group that I think feels very inclusive in terms of my sense is that women and men feel equally comfortable there. And so I think that's something that may actually be easier as a woman. There are lots of men anyway in physics, but the women come seeking me out. So that's certainly something where I think it helps a lot.
I agree. I've often thought that who does the science is important, as important as the science. Who does it? What kinds of people do it? So that's great. You're sort of reinforcing that.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Gallagher. I am from Kentucky, which is in the United States, and my question for the Women in STEM panel is, what obstacles have you faced working in a primarily male-dominated environment, and what have you done to combat these issues?
Frances, very few women have been awarded the Nobel Prize. Did you face obstacles in a male-dominated environment, and how did you cope?
I'm sure I faced obstacles, but I have the gift of being blissfully unaware of people who are trying to put obstacles in my path. I usually just go right around it. So I didn't feel that there were special obstacles that I as a woman faced other than the challenge of having a family and doing everything and taking care of everyone. I think science can be hard. And it's hard for everyone. It's hard for men. It's hard for women to compete at the highest levels. So I focused on the overall competition and pretty much ignored what the special problems were.
And you're probably really good at time management too, I suspect. I think all the women today here on our panel are really good at time management.
That's very important. You have to set your priorities and you can't be a perfectionist. I've also been given the gift of not needing to be perfect at everything, and that has served me extremely well.
Wise words, wise words.
Hi, my name is Rabdi War, and I'm from the United States of America. My question for the panel is, how do you manage to keep up with all your deadlines?
Diane, how do you manage to keep up with all the deadlines that you must face in your life?
Yeah, I think I really resonated with what Frances said right now. I also share that gift of not feeling like I have to be perfect all the time. And a long time ago when I started my lab, I became very comfortable with seeking people out to work with who are actually far more capable than I. And so that's been a great help too. So I think being able to get things done effectively is aided by your ability to be humble and to reach out and to get help from people who have strengths that are complementary to your own. I think that that's one of the great joys and gifts of being able to conduct research in top university where you're surrounded by other like-minded people who share your curiosity and bring good things to the table. And that can be really synergistic and helpful in getting more done together than you would ever be able to do in isolation. I also would say real practically, there's my dog, I knew this was gonna happen. Excuse me, is that you have to keep your dog barricaded if you're trying to get something done. And it's also useful to be strategic in your prioritization. So I love making to-do lists. And I'm trying to be always, pretty clear about what the top priority is for any given day or moment, and recognize that I can't do everything all the time well. So I have to be selective.
I was going to ask you if you keep kind of a calendar with to-do lists, but it sounds like you do. You're pretty disciplined that way.
I've always, even in high school, when you had those old daily minders, I always enjoyed writing my to-do list, because I think I gained this sense of satisfaction from crossing things off my list. And so that's been a helpful device that I've used for a long time.
That's a great idea.
Hi, my name is Vivian Clarissa Chinoda from Harare in Zimbabwe, and my question for the panel is, are there still gender-based stereotypes in STEM? And if they are, how are you currently dealing with them? And how do you think we can best deal with them in future? Thank you.
So Monica, are there stereotypes about women in science fields?
So, I think there certainly are stereotypes about women in science, just as there are in all walks of life. In terms of how I cope with it, to be honest, I think my own coping strategy is largely being oblivious. And I kind of touched on this earlier, that I'm not constantly thinking of myself as the woman in the room, but just another physicist in the room. But I will say, I think there are also kind of real challenges besides just the stereotypes. So I would say typically there are differences in communication styles between men and women. And again, maybe this is partly a stereotype, but I think part of it is real, that often men are more comfortable communicating sort of aggressively. A woman might ask a question as a way of making a statement, whereas a man might assert something to see whether anyone will prove him wrong, just to have a discussion. And so to me, that was really important, actually, as a graduate student, to sort of become aware of these differences in communication styles and realize that if I wasn't being heard, maybe it was because I tried to make a statement by asking a question and nobody really listened, or they thought I just didn't understand, whereas in fact I was trying to point out that they were wrong, right? And so I think that's something that you kind of learn over time, and it helps to be consciously aware that there are these differences in order to cope with them.
So I think that brings up a really fascinating point. When you were in graduate school, did anyone try to sort of help you think about how to do questions, how to be inquisitive? Was that part of the training at all?
I think absolutely that this is something that really, in an experimental physics lab on a day-to-day basis, you almost have to be inquisitive. So a lot of the day-to-day work for a graduate student in my field is really troubleshooting. Something doesn't work the way you expect, and you're just trying to figure out why. And really, so it almost forces you to be inquisitive, because you were expecting one thing to happen and it didn't, and then you have to go in and take something apart and figure out why it doesn't work the way you thought. But in terms of did somebody help me with it, I certainly would say that my research advisor was very helpful in that regard, and coming into the lab and having discussions both about crazy ideas for what science we might do next, but also being willing to get in there and help with the problem solving, because those are skills that you really, I think, learn in sort of an apprenticeship fashion almost in graduate school, where you see how other people do it.
So that might be an important factor to consider when you're choosing a graduate advisor, is somebody who has a reputation for doing that. That's a really good point.
Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Shuren from America, and my question for the panel is, what would be the most important thing you think a new researcher or a scientist should know?
So I'm going to start with you, Frances. What is the most important thing that a new scientist should know?
That's a really good question. There's so many things a new scientist should know. I think the most important thing is that it's fascinating to understand, or to try to understand, how the world works. And it's a worthwhile way to spend one's entire life. So it's joyful. That's what a new scientist should know, that it's joyful.
I sometimes always felt when I was in the laboratory many years ago that if I discovered something that was new, I just took this moment of pure joy to think I'm the only person in the world who knows that right now, because I discovered it. and it's a new piece of information. And it's just, I think it's the one thing that kept me going when so many of my experiments didn't come out the way I thought they should come out. I mean, they were telling me something, but they were not telling me what I thought they should tell me. But it's this sort of aha moment that is just, it's an amazing moment.
No, of course, there's plenty of frustrating moments to go along with the aha moment.
Right.
But I always focus on the joyful part.
Right. Good. So I'm really interested in this question. So Monica, I wanted to ask you the same thing. What do you think is the most important thing for a new scientist to know?
You know, I think it's so hard to choose one, and it's also hard to say, what do you mean by a new scientist? Because we're constantly, I think, becoming scientists and becoming more complete scientists.
Sure, good.
But I think this idea that I actually want to latch on to something Frances said, which is this idea that there's this joy in science and that it should be fun. And you should, I think, not be afraid to sort of keep that a sort of childlike playfulness, a sense of curiosity, and be willing to be guided by kind of an intuition of, this feels interesting. Maybe I'm not even exactly sure where it's going, but it feels like an interesting problem. I'm curious about it. I think exploring this will be fun. I think keeping that sense of sort of joy and inquisitiveness is so important. But maybe also to add to that, not expecting everything to work, I think is also important, right? That's sort of part of the adventure, right?
Good point. I said it's maybe the 95% of times I thought things were maybe not going the way I thought they should, and I lived for the 5% of time when it was really great. So, but Diane,
if they all work, right, you're not trying hard enough.
No, that's right. You're right. Exactly.
And
you're not going out to the bleeding edge of inquiry, right? And so we should fully expect it not to work every once in a while.
I heard this once in the business context about entrepreneurship, that most successful entrepreneurs are people who are willing to try and fail many times. And I think that's actually also very true of science.
It's true of evolution.
I totally agree. And I would just chime in and add that you learn as much or more when things don't go as you planned, and that the whole gift and joy of science is that you're trying to just figure out what's going on. And so if your initial framework for what you thought is going on turns out not to be how it works, there's no harm, no foul there. You just sort of reorient and you try to figure out what's really the truth. I think that's very liberating, actually.
It is. And Diane, have you ever faced this sort of issue where it didn't work out like you thought it should, but it maybe led you in a totally new and sort of interesting area of research you never thought you'd get into?
Oh, many times. And I think the one thing I was just going to add to what has already been said, with which I agree wholeheartedly, is that when I'm trying to give advice to a younger person, is that you've got your whole life to explore, and you don't need to have mastered everything already. You're going to wind up discovering things that force you to learn new things that you never even thought you were going to be interested in or need to know. You can't predict that, but if you follow your curiosity, and if you believe that if you're sufficiently motivated and you work hard enough and you're tenacious, that you can learn whatever is necessary to answer the question that motivates you, then you're going to have your whole life to evolve. And it's a really great privilege, and it is an incredibly fun thing.
Yeah, that's great.
And Diane, you've done that really well, because you've melded completely different fields in a whole new way. And how would you be able to do that if you didn't try different things, if you didn't study different fields?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'm grateful because I had a good example in my PhD mentor. I joined the lab of someone who had trained as an applied mathematician. And when I joined his lab, he was just starting to get into a little bit of molecular biology in the context of trying to understand what was going on in the world's oceans. And so just observing this, inspiring advisor, I learned at an early age that you can be a lifelong learner and you can switch between fields in ways that you never saw coming. And I feel grateful that I've had the opportunity to do so in my own career.
I think that really brings up another point that I just wanted to probe a little bit, particularly because all of you in some ways have brought in sort of an interdisciplinary perspective in. And did you find, and Diane, I'll ask you this question, when you were with your colleagues at Caltech, were they helpful to you? I mean, could you get collaborations going when you needed to? Was that part of the ethos, the culture is part of the culture?
Without a doubt, it is an extraordinary place for that. And I feel very grateful that I've been able to do my science at Caltech precisely because it's so welcoming to people who want to try something different. It's a small place. And so you wind up getting to meet your colleagues in a totally different discipline just by going to get a cup of coffee. And everybody I've met over the years has been nothing but supportive every time I've had a desire to try something that's a little bit outside of my expertise, but I think might be relevant to answering my question. I've had the great fortune to collaborate with colleagues in just about every academic division at Caltech, maybe not all of them, but in a large number of them. And I feel very grateful for that opportunity.
Great, good. Monica, this question comes from Yisen, sorry, I get this right, from Taipei. And the question is the following, from Monica, did you face any difficulties in your life? And if so, how did you overcome them? And there's a follow-up question, what is your favorite movie?
Okay, those are two largely separate questions. I'll start with the first one. I have to say, I think that I'm definitely an optimist who always sees the best in things. And so I'm not somebody who sort of latches onto difficulties and particularly remembers them. But I think if you were to look sort of at my life from the outside, it certainly would not have seemed like the easiest childhood. So my father actually died when I was just a few months old. And my mother raised me and my older brother alone, which I think for her must have been a challenge. I think it's amazing what she did for us. But I would say in that sense, probably, I didn't quite have, maybe the typical childhood that others might have. But that said, I think in spite of that, it's amazing at how my mother, maybe in fact, partly because she was somebody who had studied humanities and wished she had studied something that was more marketable, said you should study math and science. And no, but I think also genuinely she sort of wished she had done some of those things and actually really encouraged me and my brother. And so anyway, I don't think I necessarily came from a background where you would have necessarily known that I would, have the support to succeed academically and so forth. But I really actually did have, my mother was very supportive, and I went to wonderful schools, I have to say, and had great teachers. And so, so in spite of that, I don't perceive it as a difficulty, but I also think sort of viewed from the outside, it wasn't necessarily the childhood. So yeah.
I'm going to put off the movie question for just a minute, but I wanted to ask you particularly a question in high school. Did you feel sort of that you were ostracized because you were a woman interested, or a young woman interested in science? What did your peers think about that?
So I have to say, I actually was very fortunate in the high school I attended. So I grew up in Northern Virginia, where there was a magnet school for science and technology. So I was able to go to this school where there actually were many like-minded students who were also interested in science and on the math team and all of these things. And so I was fortunate not to be in the case where that was a reason to be ostracized.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. I think those schools probably do a wonderful job of bringing students together who want to pursue common goals. It's terrific that you had that opportunity too. So now I'm going to ask you the question about your favorite movie.
I think I might have to choose Life is Beautiful.
That's an interesting one.
It deals with obviously a difficult time. It deals with a difficult time in history and difficult subject matters, but brings a touch of keeps a touch of humor in the dark situation.
And a hard movie to make effective. But I remember seeing that movie quite a few years ago, and it does that. Very, very difficult, but good. So Diane, I'm going to ask you a question about what is the most important question that you think you learned from designing and implementing a project?
So I guess my answer to that is that it's similar to something that I said earlier, and others have also echoed, which is that you're going to be surprised that as you go along in a project, things are not going to behave as you anticipated. And when that happens, it's actually even more interesting. And so it's important to not get discouraged when things don't go your way, but to hold on to the fact that your mental framework for what you thought was going on wasn't as nuanced as it needed to be, and that there's a puzzle and something fun about kind of taking a step back and asking a slightly different question to help you gain an insight into what, you know, is truly at the heart of what you're trying to figure out.
Good. So Frances, you really achieved the ultimate in research recognition, the Nobel Prize. And that certainly elevates your visibility and the visibility of your research, but it also comes with a great responsibility. And so how do you feel that, and how do you deal with it?
It's a fairly recent thing for me. I won the prize at the very end of 2018. I had all of 2019 to think about it, and now we're all thinking about other things right now. But I certainly, that is something that I've thought about. How do I deal with it? I try to be positive, and I try to look at the challenges that all of us face in a positive way, and think about what can I do to support others to meet those same challenges. I received much support from teachers, from collaborators, mentors, family throughout my career, and that enabled me to do what I was able to do. Now it's time to give back and to support those who are trying to do that for others and for themselves. I also, and very importantly, try not to talk about things I know nothing about. A lot of Nobel laureates make the mistake of getting involved in way too many things they know nothing about. And so that's one thing I try to avoid to do.
I imagine that invitations for you to come and speak on a whole range of topics are sort of a little bit overwhelming, and I certainly appreciate that that sentiment on your part is being able to sort of select what's the, how can you be contributory to the conversation that you're being asked to be part of. That's a big task there as well. Okay, what I'm gonna do, Diane, is I'm gonna ask you about your favorite movie, since one of our students asked that question before, and so I think you should answer it as well.
Okay. I think that in truth, I don't really have a favorite movie, so I'm going to take a cop out and tell you about the most recent movie that I saw that I really liked, which is called October Sky. And this is a true story based on a book called The Rocket Boys, about a group of kids from a coal mining town in West Virginia, and how through the support of a teacher, they entered a science fair. It's actually very appropriate to our conversation. And this launched their ability to go off and make a path for themselves, that was very different from that they grew up in. And the reason I love this movie is that, to me, one of the real wonders of science and engineering is that, to the extent that any area of human endeavor can ever be non-political, I think it's as non-political as it gets. It's really something that rewards merit and hard work. And that if you have an interest in science and engineering and a talent, and if you have the support you need to pursue it, that's critical. You really can succeed no matter where you come from. I love that about our field. I cherish that. So this movie speaks to that, and that's why I'm telling you about it.
I've seen that movie, and I agree with you. It's a very uplifting and wonderful, wonderful movie. Appreciate that. But Frances, what about your favorite movie? Do you go to movies? Have you seen anything recently that you would recommend?
I see very few movies. I just prefer other forms of entertainment. So have I seen anything recently? No. When I'm racking my brains here in real time about things that I've enjoyed, I really loved Forrest Gump. And because he's kind, and he's also lucky. And we shouldn't underestimate the importance of luck, right? Everybody thinks, oh, Nobel laureate, that's the ultimate. Well, some of us are just lucky. And we can recognize that surprise when it matters.
Well, one of the things that I've always thought is that there's talent everywhere in the human population. Opportunity is not everywhere. And you have to combine the talent and the opportunity to get the kind of result that you three represent to me. And I think we all need to be humble about that. And remember the fact that we might have had a teacher, we might have been to a school, we might have had the luxury from our parents helping us, or our families helping us in some way, that made possible everything that we've been able to achieve. And so that's a very good point. And that's a good movie. I guess what I'd like to talk a little bit about, because we haven't had a chance to really dwell on this, though Frances, I think you sort of touched upon it before, and that is there's so many societal pressures on women to and the myth that you can do everything. You can have families, you can have whatever career you want, you can do this, you can do that, and you can somehow manage it all. So how do you all deal with that? And the three of you, Frances, you've talked, maybe you could talk about it just a little bit more about, being able either to segment your life. How do you manage raising a family when you're doing this or that, particularly when your children were younger?
Yeah. Well, I had three little children when I was doing the work that ultimately won me the Nobel Prize. So I think children definitely don't get in the way. They can free up your mind to think differently. But Diane said it so well. It's really about delegating. It's learning to give up that you have the control over everything, and to trust others to take on some of the responsibility, to give responsibility to others, and to collaborate. When I learned that, which was far too late, my life got immensely better, and my students became much more empowered. They did better in their careers. And I learned a valuable lesson by having far too much to do that I couldn't possibly do it, and having to give up control. So I think that's an important lesson. You don't have control over life. Life will do things to you and with you that perhaps you would not choose. But you can rest and rely on others to help you through those times.
Monica, what about you? How do you sort of manage all the sort of pressures in your life?
To be honest, I really appreciated hearing Frances's perspective as somebody with a family, which, I don't have kids. So I do think that I've had to learn less so far about really absolutely needing to delegate in that way. But nevertheless, I'm also always finding that sort of making that transition from you know, as a graduate student or a postdoc, having sort of been that person who's doing everything myself, to really sort of finding ways of leveraging what I can do by having, you know, letting other people take ownership and responsibility. That's something that I'm constantly actually trying to get better and better at. And,
well, your lab, you know, your lab is, I think I always found, at least in my case, that my lab was another family. And I was sort of mediating disputes and doing things all the time, sort of trying to manage them all. And so you do have that as well, I imagine.
Exactly, yeah. And so that is something where, that's right, sort of being able to delegate and being able to sort of let go and watch things happen. If somebody else can do it, realizing that I shouldn't be the one doing it, and I need to figure out where are the things where I'm really needed, right? Where are the things where I actually am essential? And that's something I'm constantly trying to get better at, so.
Diane, do you want to add anything to you seem to have such a good sort of management in your life. Anything you want to add about how you sort of, all the pressures that you have?
Sure. You know, I think that one of the things that I find very helpful is to keep a sense of humor about yourself and others, and not take yourself overly seriously. I think that that's extremely helpful if you don't get all caught up in how wonderful you are or how important what you're doing is. You know, just sort of keep your perspective, because probably it's not all that. And, you know, you try and you want to make it as good as you can, but at the end of the day, you're human. And so when you accept that, and then you work within the constraints that come with being a human that's prone to all sorts of mistakes at different times, then you can be a little bit more wise about how you partner with other people, whether they're people in your career, whether they're people in your personal life. I'm kind of in the middle of the two of Frances and Monica, in that I have a child in middle school, and I think one of the things that's made it possible for me to really enjoy being a mom is that I have a supportive partner who's been incredibly responsible and helpful all the way through. And so that counts as much in terms of being able to pull things off as to have support at home as well as in the lab. And there's many different ways one can find that support, but recognizing that you need it and to go look for it, I think that that's an important thing one needs to do.
So I want to ask each of you one last quick question, the same question. So how can the young women who are watching us today support each other to stay in science? So Diane, you start quickly.
I would say don't take yourself out of the game. If you like science and engineering, believe you can do it, go for it. If you wind up, you know, getting your first B or C when you get to college, when you got all A's in high school, don't crumble at that. Just go get help, you know. Don't break down when things don't go your way the first time. Hang in there and recognize that many of the best scientists, you know, failed also, and they kept moving. And so that's the thing to do, is just like keep your eye on the long term. You don't have to know it all.
Frances?
I think that women are great at supporting each other. They're great team members. And if they focus on the positive and not on the negatives, right, then we form fabulous networks that are extremely supportive.
Monica, you have the last word on this.
Yeah, I fully agree that forming those networks is so important. And I think from the time I was in graduate school up to today, I've had some sort of an informal network, be it the women I went running with who were also, you know, graduate students in science, and you could informally talk about things that were going on and realize, you know, oh, this isn't just my experience, she's had that experience too, and bounce ideas off of each other. And now I have a wonderful group of young faculty women here at Stanford who, you know, will text each other about something that happened today, and 5 people will reply with their perspectives. And that support is so wonderful to have.
That's great. Well, listen, I want to thank all of you for being with us today to share your wisdom and advice, and good luck to all these wonderful young scientists who participate in ISEF. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.